Deepti?
I am it's ramping up. So it's very different, all the new processes and the new environment, and complete onboarding completely remote is an interesting
Oh, yeah.
experience. So, but yeah, it's going well.
So you directly work with Pfizer or you work through CRO?
No, I'm at Pfizer.
You're at Pfizer.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So
great.
it's via Syneos, but it's a FSP model. So you're placed at the sponsor, like
So does
100% dedicated to Pfizer.
yeah, but does it mean that's your Pfizer's employee or CRO's employee?
So technically, I'm Syneos employee, but like I don't have Syneos laptop or anything like that. It's all completely so
That's interesting. The
yeah.
first time I'm hearing the CRO hires people and place them inside of the pharma. That's cool.
Yeah, that's the FSP, fully dedicated FSP model.
What is FSP?
Functional service provider.
Oh, okay. New
Yeah.
models coming. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So the CRO does all the hiring and the work that goes into hiring people, but you're placed at the client.
Are you still in oncology?
Not really, but I'm still getting projects assigned. Um, so I'm still kind of starting a little bit slow. The onboarding is very thorough for them. So not oncology though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. I
Yeah.
think we
It's,
have
it's,
everybody here now. Deepti.
yeah.
Yeah.
There, everybody's here. Okay, great. All right. Do you want me to get started then?
So Rafa said 5 minutes. Has it been 5 minutes? I don't take the time
Yeah,
really.
you guys can start. I can still listen. I'm just getting back home, and I joined you guys from phone, so
Okay.
I'll be there in a minute. So I can listen to you guys still. Thank you.
Okay.
Good,
All
good.
right.
Okay. All right. So you can see I'm starting the presentation, so you can see my screen, the presentation, the first slide, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, great. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. I will be talking about clinical research career development, but specifically, I will be focusing on study startup because that's the area of research that I'm in right now. So this will be your opportunity to get to know a little bit more about what exactly study startup entails from a sponsor's perspective, the pharmaceutical company's perspective. So currently, I work as a site activation partner at Pfizer. And I just recently started here at Pfizer, but I've worked in startup before at Roche as well. So we'll talk a little bit about, in general, about career pathways that you can take. And then I will dive deeper into study startup, like I said, from a sponsor's um, perspective. And then I will also cover a little bit about building your personal brand as you start to venture out looking for jobs or building your career. And also, importantly, skill set development and job search in general. Also, along the way, if you at any point have any questions, feel free to stop me and ask away. So, in general, there's a few different ways you can be working in this vast field of clinical research. There's the drug development or the clinical operations area, where you could be working at a clinical study site, at a sponsor, or a CRO. Shelley and I were just talking, just so many different models. You could be, like in my case, I'm a CRO employee, but it's a functional service provider model. So it's 100% dedicated to a sponsor, which in my case it's Pfizer. So or you could be directly hired by the sponsor. It just depends what the processes are for a particular pharmaceutical company, which is what I mean by a sponsor. And of course, you can also be working directly at clinical study sites, in the trenches, working with patients, getting the studies up and running, executing them up until closeout. There's also data management, and by that I mean simply data entry, data collection, writing data queries, managing those. There's obviously regulatory as well, which could look like medical writing or submissions to the FDA, Health Canada, or sometimes at a site, what that refers to is submissions to ethics committees or IRBs. And lastly, drug safety, which by that I mean pharmacovigilance, or making sure all the SUSARs or this adverse reactions related to a particular pharmaceutical product are appropriately collected, followed up, and acted upon as the trial progresses. So let's focus a little bit more now on clinical operations, because that's where I'm at, and that's my in general can be divided into two areas. It's the clinical study site operations and the operations at the sponsor or the CRO that happens behind the scenes. So talking about clinical study site operations, that could look a few different ways. So there's obviously the full range of clinical research coordination, which at many sites, there's one person doing it all. This person is screening, enrolling, submitting to IRB, ethics committee, actually executing, doing the study procedures, obviously under the oversight of the principal investigator and the sub-investigators, up until closeout. But that clinical research coordinator job can further be divided, and there could be research assistants, and that could look like someone who is only screening and enrolling, someone who's only doing data collection or data entry. Or in my case, when I first started a few years ago, many years ago now that I think, one of the big parts of my job, I was at a site in the US, and I was assisting the main coordinator. This is my first job after my internship. And I actually was placed for internship at that site, and I got hired on. So as part of my job, a majority of the portion was spent on processing safety reports. Now, safety reports are basically reports that are sent. So if something goes wrong, a serious adverse event has to be submitted per policy, per procedures, based on the requirements for a study. They have to be submitted to the sponsor, and then it is then further distributed to all the other sites that are participating in the study, so they can submit to their local IRB, again, per institutional policy, to just keep everyone aware of what are the different adverse reactions happening with this particular drug. Now, safety reports are obviously the description of the actual adverse event that is submitted. But in addition to that, there's also causality assessment, severity assessment, relatedness to the study. All of those assessments are done by the site PI and submitted to the sponsor, and then that gets further distributed on to the other sites. So long story short, I was one of those sites, and we would get all these safety reports from around the world because we were one of the sites, and our IRB's policy was that we would need to submit it to the IRB every single time. Now remember, an initial safety report is sent to you as soon as the basic information is available. You don't hold on to any information or wait for any information until the whole thing is the situation is clear. You submit whatever is available and go from there. So you would have the main safety report, and then follow-ups to follow-ups to follow-ups. So just to give you an idea, it was a big chunk of the coordinator's time to do safety reports. So that portion was outsourced to me. I was a research assistant. So if you think about it, it was just safety reports, processing them. You can't just submit as is the form to your IRB. Their policies were different. They had to be submitted a certain way. So what did I learn along the way? I learned how to quickly read a safety report. What is the important information that I need to submit to the IRB? What are the different adverse events that we need to be aware of? And just time management, because it had to be prioritized based on when we received it. They had to be submitted to our IRB within a certain time frame. So just one of the many pieces of a research coordination. Of course, that was many years ago. Policies have changed along the way, and every institution has their own processes as well. But what I'm trying to tell you is there's every little task that you are assigned, there's something to learn from it. To me, I was just starting on. To me, I was building that experience from simply processing safety reports. But I was also in turn helping the coordinator because it was a big chunk of their time, because it was not one study, it was many studies happening at the site. So it was an interesting experience, to say the least. And then data management is another piece that can be separated out, which could be at a site as data collection or data entry in the electronic data capture systems. And the regulatory submissions, like I said earlier, is submitting the main protocol or the amendments to the IRB to get approvals. And then every year there's progress reports to be submitted for the study, so you keep the IRB abreast of what's going on with the study to close out. So you would submit a closeout report to whenever the time comes. Now flip this and go over to the sponsor and CRO side. Looks very different. This is all behind the scenes, and the sponsor, the CRO, is working with each of the study sites, holding their hand to get the study up and running and conducted a certain way up until closeout. Everything hinges on that relationship between the site and the sponsor. So the sponsor or the CRO clinical operations, that can be divided into like study startup, the actual study management after startup up until closeout. Along the way, there's clinical monitoring, which is data monitoring to make sure everything is kosher and per protocol and there's no issues or a jeopardy to patient safety. Of course, there's data management too from the sponsor side, where the sponsor is actually setting up that electronic data capture system for the site to be able to enter the information. The CRFs, case report forms, are being created per protocol. So I'll talk more in detail about startup in the following slides. Does anybody have any questions? So like this could be a good stopping point to check in. I can't see y'all, sorry.
Not yet, I think.
Okay, all right, great, thank you. So let's move into study startup. Again, I'm referring to startup at the sponsor or from the CRO's perspective. So study startup can be divided into study feasibility and the actual study startup. Now, study feasibility, which is when you have the final protocol and you have to plan the whole study to make sure to set up for success and is conducted the way it is supposed to be to meet enrollment goals, to be able to maybe do a follow-up study if it's a phase 2, or if it's phase 3, is it going to be submitted to the FDA or any other regulatory authority to be available to patients. So study startup, I think, is a very important piece because it sets up the trial for success. Any issues in this area, any delays can really affect everything down the road and really make or break the study. So this slide just lists briefly what all these two sections entail. So study feasibility is essentially study site identification and the pre-selection assessments that happen. followed by site selection. I will be in the following slides talking more in detail about each of these sections. So I'm just giving a quick overview in this slide right now. And then after your sites have been selected, you move into study startup with those selected sites, and that can have so many different moving pieces that really affect the entire timeline for the study. And so study startup includes a collection of essential documents from the sites, the contracts and the budgets piece, obviously, the ethics committee or IRB submissions and approval, the vendor setup or system setup, again, very dependent on the study that is being conducted, site initiation visits, which are like training visits for the site before they actually begin the study, and then finally the site activation, which everybody is really waiting for and asking you over and over again, okay, where are we at with sites? How many activated? How many pending? What's the status? So everybody is really, their eyes are on the site activation, the first site to be activated, because that really starts the whole process for recruitment. Sites will not be able to start recruitment until they're fully activated. So let's dive deeper into study feasibility. So study feasibility, study startup in general is very fast-paced. Study feasibility is even faster, if that's possible, because it's all very dependent on strict timelines for the study. You start with the final protocol, obviously, not a draft one, but you start to get involved in the process early on because you're trying to understand the need of the protocol. What's the study design? What is the rationale behind the study? What kind of study population are you looking at? How many number of sites and how many number of participants per site are you looking for? Now, typically, I don't want to generalize, but typically there's a team assigned to a country. A study can be conducted in, for example, in the US, Canada, Australia. There could be some other sites in Europe or other parts of the world. But typically, there's one team assigned to a country. And so when I'm talking about study population, number of sites, number of participants, you're focusing on the country that you're assigned to, but also it's important to understand the big picture, like how many sites total in the world are there, and of those, how many have been allotted to a particular country? Is there a cap to the number of sites? There's just so many questions just to get an understanding on what's being planned by the science team. And then the study timeline projections. What are the first site projected timelines for first site activation, first participant enrolled, last participant, last visit, and the study closeout? So these factors, these dates really will give you an idea of how fast the study is going to be. Is it going to be super fast or medium paced, or you have a little bit of time to breathe? It just depends on these dates. So if you have first site activation planned in 3 months, it's a very fast study, because in 3 months you have to, if feasibility has not been conducted yet. If feasibility is done and you have a final site list, that's a different story. But if you're just starting with a rough list of sites that you've been given and you go on from there, 3 months is fast. 6 months is medium. 8 months, I would say, is longer duration. So just something to keep in mind. And then, so talking about the sites list, the site metrics are very important. That is, what are the key characteristics of sites that are needed for this study? If it's a fast-paced study, would you want to have a site that has a local IRB, which takes historically 1 year to approve a project? Probably not a good idea. You want to obviously have the sites that have the study population, what kind of experience they have in the past with this particular sponsor that you're working with. What are the contract or budget timelines, IRB timelines? So that the historical information definitely gives you a good idea of what kind of a site it is, what's the experience level for the PI, the sub-I, or the research staff. And then you do the pre-selection assessments of the shortlisted sites, which is an actual conversation with the site PI and the research staff to get an idea about their interest in the study, their capabilities, and any other issues that might be. And then you come to a final list, site list, based on all your assessments. So just something to keep in mind also is that you have to have confidentiality disclosure agreements with each of the sites or institutions that the sponsor is working with. There has to be a CDA, or a confidentiality disclosure agreement, in place before any confidential information is shared with the site. So that's an important piece to do before you just send a protocol synopsis to the site. And before the pre-selection assessments actually happen, many a times sponsors will send a feasibility survey to the site, which has specific information, questions about the capabilities of the study, for the study that the site may have, just to get an initial information ahead of time before the actual conversation happens. So you can't ask the questions over the phone, or even when you visit. In COVID times, we've been doing pre-selection assessment visits over the phone, but you can also visit the site. So just to make the most of the time, the surveys are sent out to the sites beforehand, and then take that information and then have the conversation with the PI and the research staff. Now, during that pre-selection assessment conversation, some of the typical questions that we ask the PI are, well, first and foremost, do you have the patient population? How many patients for that particular therapeutic area do you see a year? Talking about recruitment and what I call the recruitment funnel. So they could, for example, be seeing 100 patients a year for Alzheimer's. I'm just throwing numbers and giving an example. So if they say 100 patients a year, of those Alzheimer's patients, how many do you think will fall in the age group that is required for the study? So like whatever, 50 to 80. Of those, how many do you think will have a score, an MMSE score of whatever is required for the study? And then you go on and ask questions like that. So how many truly do you think will qualify by the inclusion-exclusion criteria for the protocol? How many do you think will truly qualify at your site? That's a pretty small number. So they started with 100. Of course, you're not going to be able to enroll all of these patients. And so even if all the IE criteria, inclusion-exclusion criteria are met, not everybody's going to want to participate in the trial. So, and that's always something that we can't guess. It's just going to have to the study's just going to have to pan itself out. So it's always a conservative approach that is taken, but this conversation helps bring out what issues there might be, any recruitment barriers. So then we talk about actually, okay, how many randomized participants do you think your site can have? 1, 2 a month, or how many total? And then see if that matches with the needs for what the study needs overall. And then also talk about timelines. We really talk about how much time the contracts and budgets are going to take to be executed. The IRB, is it just the central IRB or local IRB, or is it hybrid? Like the central IRB approves it, but the local IRB still has to see the review, and so they still have to look at it. It's shorter, but there's still one more step. Are there any additional committees? Some sites have a scientific committee, a compliance committee, a budget committee. All of those committees need to review it before anything can happen. So all those conversations really happen in this pre-selection assessment, and then you take all of that into consideration, look at all the sites that you've talked to pick out the best of all, and come to a final site list. So once you have a final site list, you can take a little bit of a deep breath and then start up again. So with the final site list, you move into, so these different pieces that I'm going to be talking about within startup don't necessarily happen one after the other. Most definitely they don't. It happens in parallel. Also depends on the site's policies. Some sites have policies that say you have to have an agreed upon budget before we can submit to the IRB. Some sites say we have to have a fully executed contract before we can touch anything with regulatory documents. Some sites require the budget contract to be executed and the IRB to be approved before anything with the essential documents or regulatory documents can be done. So every site is different. Every site has their own processes, and all of this information would be known and collected in the pre-selection assessment. So you would have a good idea of what kind of a site we are dealing with and how many different moving parts for that site there are within startup. So the essential document collection piece, which is the regulatory documents, are important, where you collect the PI SBI information, and by that I mean CVs, medical licenses. You also collect the sites and facilities information, like if there is a satellite site apart from the main site that is going to be conducting the study. If there's specific labs, MRI facilities, any other imaging facilities, you collect all of that information. Form 1572 for sites in the US, which is an investigator statement committing to the study. Very important piece in the whole regulatory documents. Financial disclosures collected from the PI and all the sub-investigators, their GCP training, any study logs, lab information, accreditation or lab normal ranges that are collected, and any other study-specific documents. This takes time. It's not that you send an email to the site and it is returned with all documents at once. There are sites that do that, but more often than not, it comes in pieces. You have to do follow-ups. You have to make sure after the regulatory documents are collected, you have to make sure it is all appropriate. There are no issues if there's any GCP corrections needed, if there's no expired licenses, if there's any issues with any of the sub-investigators in terms of being on a FDA debarment list or any other conditions that may be on a particular sub-investigator or PI or a facility. And then after these documents are collected, they go into the trial master file, which is the main location where all of these documents are housed and can be easily retrieved in case of an audit. The contracts and budgets. So during feasibility, while sites are being selected, generally there's the budget and the contracts team working on the budget template, which is going to be specific to the study. So within the study protocol, you have the schedule of assessments or schedule of activities. That table is a very important piece that feeds into the budget template. The budget template is very busy, very intricate, very detailed, because it lists out every single item, line item, how many times it is done within the study based on the protocol, what the unit cost for that is, for example, informed consent, or collection of height and weight, collection of vital signs, and so many other study procedures that happen. How much PI time, how much coordinator time, and any other invoiceable items that there may be. So the budget is that piece also takes time. It's all happening behind the scenes while potentially sites are being selected. And then the budget template's also going to differ per country because the country might have specific requirements. And so the budget template, once it's finalized and the sites are finally selected, it can be sent to the site to start the negotiation with the site and their contracts and budget team. That also takes time. Contracts and budgets are a very big factor that cause delays in study startup. It takes time because it's not like you send the budget and they see it and they're like, okay, yeah, there's going to be negotiations. There's going to be questions asked. It's going to come back, and then there's going to be discussions on the sponsor end to see if what the site is proposing is acceptable. They may ask for more things that are not in the budget, just a lot of negotiations that need time. So as soon as a site is selected, that's the first thing that's at least the aim, to send the contracts and the budgets out, so we make the most of the time up until startup. The IRB or ethics committee submissions, like I said earlier, there's central IRB or local IRB, or some sites have hybrid where the central IRB has approved it, but their local IRB still needs to review it. It's a quick review, but it's still an additional step. So central IRB can, the sponsor usually submits to the central IRB at the study level, and then once it's approved at the study level, each site will then just submit their information. If there's any changes to the consent document, site specific, that those are submitted by the site to the central IRB, and it's a quicker turnaround because the main study is actually already approved. It's not that they do it from scratch every time for each site. So it's a central IRBs are definitely a quicker turnaround time. Every study then also will be using different vendors or systems, and so we have to really work with the sites to get their system training and access in place. By vendors, I mean for lab kits, or maybe there's equipment that is being sent to the site. So it just depends on the study. So all of that has to be set up, and then make sure each of the sites staff, as required, does the training and gets the access for example, for the lab kits portal or the electronic data capture, or if there's any other portals that the sponsor uses. This is very sponsor and study specific. And then after all of the contracts, budgets pieces done, and the IRB piece is done, the docs are collected, the regulatory docs, you move into the site initiation visits, which are essentially training visits for your site. You talk about the entire study and all the details about the protocol, the requirements from the research team before they can actually start doing the study. The timeline of these SIVs or site initiation visits is very dependent on the sponsor and the study. So like I said, if it's a quick startup overall for the study, you're going to have quicker SIVs set up. And also depends on when it's approved at the site. The study, most often, study has to be IRB approved, contract has to be executed before the SIVs can happen. So the idea is to have the SIV as close as possible to the site actually starting to do the study, because it's a training visit, right? So you don't want to train up your site and then wait on things, and then 4 months down the line have them start the study. That doesn't make sense. So you most likely need to have the site almost ready before the SIVs can be conducted. They can be on or off-site. During COVID, we've been conducting off-site over the phone teleconference visits, but CRAs can also go on-site. And after the SIV, if there's any post-action SIV action items, like some logs or some signatures, last-minute signatures, the training logs would need to be completed after the SIV. So there's most always going to be some action items. So before the site can be actually activated, there's some final checks to be done, like is the documentation in place? Are all the regulatory documents collected and QC'd to make sure everything is right? There's no errors or nothing is expired before site is activated. The IRB approval is in place, contract is fully executed, budget included in that, obviously, and system accesses are in place. The study drug shipment, again, depends on the study and the sponsor. Sometimes it's shipped before the SIV, sometimes it is shipped after, but that's another piece if there's a study drug that is being shipped. Any other equipment that the study is sending to the sites, and then non-drug shipments like lab kits or patient-reported outcomes in paper form, which are like surveys of that the participants would need to complete, any other booklets or regulatory binders. We used to have these big fat regulatory binders sent by sponsors, but nowadays everybody's moving into electronic for ease of use. So we don't always have that. But any other paper forms or study-specific documents that have to be paper, all of that comes under the non-drug shipment. So once all the final checks are done and everything is in place, you can then activate the site. And then you do this for every site that you're working with. So you could have either 5 sites, 10 sites, 20 sites. It just depends on the study and how many are allotted to the country. Any questions about what we've talked about so far?
All good.
Okay, great. So in general, if I were to summarize what are the study startup characteristics, it's definitely fast-paced. There's strict timelines to follow. And startup really affects downstream processes, which could be just the conduct of the study, to actually, getting the drug that much faster to the market for our patients, or beating competition. It's just affects a whole lot downstream. And so it can make or break your trial. It's very important to stay on top of the different moving parts. There's a lot of different moving parts, so you have to pivot quite often around the moving parts. And the ability to work with different study sites in various stages. So we have our final site list and we start from there, but not every site is going to be at the same stage throughout, because every site has their own processes, own committees, own timelines. And so you could be working with a site that is a central IRB site that is relatively quicker, but their contracts taking longer, or local IRB sites, that's a whole different ballgame. It takes longer. So you would be potentially activating sites at different timelines, still within the overall accepted timeline for the study, but still different. So you have to be able to work in any given day with different sites and different stages. So of course, that leads to prior time management and prioritization. You have to be able to figure out what's needed to make the most of your time to get that first site activated, or wherever that site lies in the whole process is whatever that X task. Is it important right now, or would you rather do this other task with another site because you're so close to activation? So those are the kind of decisions that you have to make. The art of follow-up. This is my favorite one, because really it's an art. You have to work with your study sites and really follow up and follow up and follow up, and not sound pesky, but then you still have to follow up and ask questions, because you're working with them. So it's about that partnership, without just sitting there asking questions to the site, being able to work with them to remove any roadblocks, to facilitate the process, ask questions so you know where the site lies in the process. And so early on, you would figure out how many times you need to follow up before you escalate further. Do you wait a week before you can ask a question about the same thing, or do you wait 2 weeks, or lesser than a week? It just depends. So like something like IRB submission is important because it takes time further. So you can't wait 2 weeks to just see if the site is submitted to the IRB. You ask the site on the front end what's your target date of submission, and that they would send you the confirmation of submission. And if you don't get that by that date, you can't wait 2 weeks from there to ask the site, hey, did you actually submit? You would want to catch it early on. Or informed consent reviews. Once the site puts the informed consent template in their template, you have to, from the sponsor side, actually review it to make sure it makes sense and includes all of the information that should be. So that back and forth also takes time. So you have to be able to follow up. I'm just giving some examples. There's so many different things you need to follow up with the sites for. One of the systems I have is there's obviously a lot of email follow-up. So I have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday folder in my inbox. So when I send something to an email to a site saying, whatever, submit to your IRB, for me to be able to remember, okay, next week I need to follow up, or I send the email on Monday, I need to follow up on Friday. After that email is sent, I'll put it in my Friday folder. So whenever Friday comes around, every day I go in the morning and check that folder. So when on Friday I go and check that email, I'll know it's time for follow-up. I don't need to put it in another to-do list or track somewhere else. The email serves as a reminder. And I would say setting realistic expectations is also important for sites and for internal team members. You can't say, yeah, we can activate a site within a month when you know their timelines speak differently, or as you work with them, you're realizing there's more roadblocks than you had anticipated. And so keeping the team members abreast of what's really going on and keeping it realistic so they can plan, because it has implications and on the bigger picture of the study. There's a lot of tracking to be done. Every sponsor has their own systems, portals, trackers, Google Sheets, Excel sheets, any other fancy portals. So a lot of tracking about what's going on with each of the sites in all the different moving parts. And last but not the least, you have to follow policies and procedures, because it's very important. You can't just do whatever you want. Policies and procedures change, and so keeping yourself aware of what needs to be done and if you're following SOPs per the sponsor. So let's talk quickly about building your personal brand. Just some of the questions I want to leave you with to think about as you venture out, build your career. What are your strengths? This is a very cliched question that sometimes gets asked in interviews, but even if it's not asked, it is just something, a conversation to have with yourself. What do you bring to the table that makes you unique? And why do you want to be in clinical research? Again, this may not be a question that's asked directly to you, but that drives you, that drives your passion. Everybody's reason could be different, but having that conversation with yourself, I feel, is very important to keep going, to keep that drive. And who do you aspire to be in 5 years, in 10 years? And it's going to change because it's a moving target, right? You're not going to be stagnant. So as you, every day, 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years may be too long of a timeline to think about. Just something to always keep on the back of your mind, front of your mind, wherever, to be able to self-assess. And transferable skills is also something that you need to really think about. You may be coming from a different field, not clinical research, but could have certain skills that are what's called transferable skills, like project management or time management. Being ready with specific examples of how that's a transferable skill. So in a different setting, you did this, and for example, with time management, and how that would be important for a particular job. And just being able to work with various systems. Technology is at the forefront of everything. All sponsor studies are using so many different technologies. I'm not just talking about your basic Microsoft Office anymore. It's just so much more than that. So being able to work with those various systems, and you're not expected to know this before you actually start the job. You get on the job training for all of them, but just being ready and being aware that there's going to be a lot of different systems to use. Attention to detail is also extremely important. If it was not documented, it didn't happen, be it at a site or a sponsor CRO. Attention to detail is key. And then lastly, your online presence. And by that, I mean LinkedIn, making use of LinkedIn effectively. It's your resume that everybody's watching. And so being able to keep it updated and engaging in conversations that happen on LinkedIn, commenting, and not just commenting, but just adding more, adding your opinions or enhancing the conversation. Takes time. I'm myself working on it too. It doesn't come immediately. It's work in progress for sure, but just something to be aware of. And lastly, we'll quickly talk about skill set development or job search. So, you have to continuously keep developing your skill sets. Continuing education is very important. This could look like formal or informal. By formal, I mean obviously there's certifications and courses available, but informal is also equally important, where there's online. There's just so much going on. COVID has really changed and really brought the spotlight on our field. So there's just so many webinars and YouTube videos, or even on LinkedIn. So just being aware of that. And with that, I want to really recommend that you follow Guru Nation. It's a YouTube channel by Dan Safera, dear friend of mine. And he started this channel a few years ago. It's been a clinical research professional for a few years, many years now. And he has these videos on so many different areas within the research. And just listening to it makes you aware of what all is out there. And he talks to different people in the field, so you learn from those conversations as well, and there's so much more. So just something to keep in mind. Guru Nation, GURUNATION. That's the name of his channel. Dan Safera, SFERA. And then moving on to job search, I really want to make you aware that job titles don't really mean anything. What a particular job, in terms of a job search, I mean, a job title at a particular institution could mean one thing, but at another institution could mean something else. So to really scrutinize the job descriptions, that's really going to give you a good idea of what their job really entails. And entry-level positions can also have so many different titles. So that's why just keep in mind the job description is very important. And lastly, I also want to tell you about what I do and have been doing since the start of my career. I have job search alerts set up on LinkedIn and Indeed with keywords like clinical trials or clinical research, nothing else. I'm not always looking for a job, but every week the alert sends me these jobs. That's my way of keeping myself aware of what all's out there. You don't know what you don't know. So by way of reading these job descriptions, it really helps me understand what all is out there. If there's something else that I potentially like, what does that job description say? Where do I stand? What's the gap? How do I bridge that? It gives you so much information. So just something that has helped me personally a lot is those job search alerts. And that's why the keyword is only clinical research or clinical trials, nothing else, because the job titles don't necessarily mean anything. Same job can have so many different titles in different places, and the same title can have different job descriptions in different places. So that's it. I think I don't have anything else. So thank you. This is a journey. It has its ups and downs. Keep your eyes on the path wherever you're headed.
Deepti, could you just put it on the chat box, the link that your friend has on YouTube?
Sure.
Because I couldn't catch you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for me? I hope that was helpful.
It was. Thank you so much.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Rafa, and ask your questions.
Me?
Oh, I thought you wanted to say something. Sorry.
No. I was thinking that it was very informative.
Great.
I had a question, but then I thought maybe it would be a silly question, and I did not ask.
No questions, really.
So when you're talking about protocol and feasibility, so let's suppose we have developed a protocol, and it's a very interesting research, and then we find it that it's not feasible.
Yeah, it
Okay.
happens.
I'm trying to find the YouTube, and that's why I display. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
so
good.
sorry. I'll do it later.
Now.
I'll
So,
send it to. I'm so sorry, Rafa. Yeah, you said.
so the feasibility, is it for the study or is it for the site?
Good question. It is not, the study feasibility is not referring to whether you can do the study. That's already been done and decided.
Nice.
You're muted. So your question.
Sorry, the music just started playing on its own. I'm so sorry. The feasibility is not talking about whether you can do the study or not. That's already been decided that we're doing the study, and there's going to
Right.
be a number of countries participating. And then the startup team will then work with the sites to figure out that if that study is possible, feasible at a particular site, and then choose accordingly.
Okay. Yeah.
When you're talking to sites at that time, you're not into mindset of whether the study can be done or not. Study is being done, and we're
Okay.
moving forward, just picking the right sites.
So when we are in the very beginning of the study, so do we design the protocol first, or do we find out that if this study would be feasible at all or not? And I'm not talking about when once you have done the protocol. I'm talking about even before that.
Yeah. So the science team works with different stakeholders when they're writing the protocol to figure out what is the best way. And it's not just you take into consideration previous studies. There's the site groups as well that work with the science team to provide input to make sure all of the right information is included within the protocol to make it feasible. That you're not looking to do something with sites that is not going to be a feasible study procedure, something crazily invasive for the study population, for example. So it all happens in the drafting of the protocol. Once you have that final protocol, all of that is already taken into consideration and then moves into to the startup team. So if you ask me, I've not been involved with protocol writing. I'm with the startup team. It comes to us from science.
Yeah, sometimes it happens, Rafi, when sponsors they design the protocol and they give it to like Deepti to go ahead and select the sites, and in this process, we figure out that something is not right. Like we can run this study in the U.S. and the same study in the U.K. or in Canada. So when we collect these insights, it might be provincial guidelines, it would be anything. So when we hear these things from doctors, we go back to the sponsor saying this cannot be feasible in this country because of this and that. So sponsor again redesign or makes changes to the protocol for that to be feasible in different countries. So that's a possibility too.
Right. And the health authorities have to, like for example, the FDA has to review the study to approve it to begin. And so when the FDA reviews it, they may ask for changes to the study only for the US. And so the science team then figures out is it a small enough change to make to the entire protocol or a big enough change to just keep it a separate protocol for the US based because that requirement is only for the US. It just depends. So the changes and all of that happen before the feasibility process for the sites starts.
Right. Yeah. So
Thank
many
you.
commitments, so many changes, back and forth communication with all stakeholders, from regulatory bodies, doctors, physicians, and IRB, REB. Sometimes patients survey.
Yeah, patient advocacy groups also
Right.
play a role.
So from your experience, you have worked in US and now you're working in Canada. And during our course, we learned that in Canada it's harder to run a study. Is that the case in your experience or not?
I'll be honest. I am working in Canada, like physically, I sit in Canada, but so far I've supported U.S. sites. This is my first time working with Canadian sites.
Okay.
I haven't really started working with them just yet at Pfizer, so I won't be
Okay.
able to answer that question for you, and I don't want to guess, obviously. So the U.S. is fast. Um, I might have to get back with factors with Canadian sites.
Okay.
I don't know if Shelly has any input.
Maybe you should ask your question again, Rafael, to make sure I'm correct and I'm politically correct. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So Shelly, in your experience, like you have a long experience of working in clinical research in US and Canada. So what is your experience politically and scientifically that where it is easier to conduct the clinical trials?
Different countries?
US versus Canada.
Oh, US versus Canada. So, okay. So, as Deepti said, US is way faster. They're competitive. We know that. Here, we're more relaxed. Or, like, the thing that bothers me in Canada, and I want to find a way to make it happen, is to have more physician researchers. We don't have enough physician researchers at all. Like I struggle to find good research sites for the studies. But whenever I go to the States, there's so many. Like we have so many sites in the States. But when I look at the all the provinces in Canada, like I might find one in Calgary, like maybe few in Ontario, which is good, few in Quebec, and that's it. So yeah, so really I would love to see this growth in Canada in terms of research sites, physician researchers, and I'm trying to promote it.
And this is what I aspire to be in future. But like in your experience, Shelley, like why do you think that in Canada we have, especially in Calgary, we have so less of the physician researchers as compared to Toronto or US?
So this is a very good question. I wish I had the correct answer, like concrete answer. But what I think is like maybe we should find ways to invest more in research and innovation, in science and innovation, promote it. Maybe we shouldn't rely on USA, for example, or we shouldn't rely completely on the USA. We should be independent in our research, for the future of next generation. Um, so, in better investments and giving more opportunities to scientists to grow in the field, bringing more physicians on board, more training and education. I think these are the elements that help us to get there. What else? What else?
I mean,
Anybody?
I've been to the clinics, and when I was doing some observerships with the doctors, and I was discussing with them the idea of that, should we do some research? And they all weren't. I mean, I have been to two, so both of them they were interested, but I don't know. Maybe they did not meet anyone. Did no one approach them, or they did not have the training for research, and that's why they were a bit reluctant. And one of the family physician that I go to, and he had an interesting case. So we're trying to publish that, but that is not a clinical research. That's just an article. So even though they must have a lot of interesting cases, and they must have the patient population for the common diseases on which the researches are being conducted every day.
So you mean they have the subject population, but they don't have industry experience. They have just academic experience, and they're not accepted. Yes. So this is what Health Canada and FDA says, because it's human research. It's highly regulated. All the physicians, they need to have experience. So this is another question: is egg or chicken? Which one comes first, experience or the work? Now we have many young investigators, young physicians. They want to do clinical trials. So another question is how to make them ready. Like, we have full oversight by a PI if they have time, and engage a young investigator, or what else? There's just so many questions, but there must be a way to be able to onboard them, get them ready to do clinical trials beside academic research. That's the way we can bring medicine faster, right? I always say, why do you have to wait 18 years for a medicine to come to the market so patients have access to it? So COVID taught us good lessons that it is doable if we have enough funding, enough resource, and being agile, like be fast. It's good if we take that lesson and learn from it.
Yeah, and also diversity of participants to be included by being able to involve other uh,
Exactly.
provinces.
You've been in oncology research, like I used to work in oncology, the inclusion exclusion is so hard that only maybe 2% of cancer patients can participate. Um, yeah, these are all the questions. I asked my sponsors from pharma, I said, come on, your inclusion exclusion is too hard. I cannot enroll anyone.
Yeah, yeah.
And they have their own logic too. So, but it's good with this back and forth communication and meetings, and they come up with solution. If this communication happens and people sit and talk together, they can find ways. Sometimes they just, people have no time, or just, everybody's busy. This silo kills everything. Um, yeah, what else?
Any other questions?
No, Shelly, I wanted to ask you. You said a lot of young physicians want to come on board on the clinical research. So, what kind of training do they need to get on it? Because I know that Canada is so far from what I've checked. So far, there's no medical degree in Canada that involves research as part of the curriculum. But whereas in Australia and US, they are going towards all the application process. They have two processes. Like one is totally research stream, one is like totally like clinical stream. So they have 7 long years to 9 long years, or 4 versus 4 years. So
No,
how
Pon.
do
Yeah, sorry. So, no, even undergrad medical students, they all have to publish at least two research articles before graduating. So, no, research is a requirement for medical doctors over here
Yeah,
yeah,
also.
so
agree, but they do not do it as like what Rafi said or Shelly said. They do not streamline them into research, so they cannot become like a PI or upon
So,
graduation.
So I know this for a fact. So it depends upon institution to institution. So, for example, UFT promotes research. They want
Yeah.
medical graduates to go into research and not into clinicians. At UFC, I know that it is a requirement that they have to publish two articles. They're heavily involved in research, but obviously, it's not the institution by itself is not as big as US.
sorry, are we talking about MD PhD, or we talking
MD.
about
I think she's
Yeah,
talking about MD.
okay,
MD as in MBBS. Like, do
Yeah,
they?
MD. Yeah.
right?
Deputy, you are about to say something, I thought.
No, no.
No? No.
Yeah. So MDs here during their residency, they do research. Like they have to have publication. But those research projects, they're not medication. They don't study medication, unfortunately. So that's something that could be added as curriculum or research project. The research they do is usually quality improvements or something with data collection. It's academic. It's purely academic. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
So
So
yeah, go ahead.
So let's suppose I want to be a physician researcher. So once I'm done with I have the license and I go through residency. So should I be training in research after I've done residency or before I have done residency? Or I don't know if there is a residency where they have research, like a proper clinical trial research combined in residency.
No, I haven't heard of clinical trial research in residency. No.
Yeah, there isn't a residency. In the US, there are like master's programs that I've seen physicians do after residency because their heart lies in research, or they've done it simultaneously with residency. But with research, you have to be even within. I don't know how really the landscape is in Canadian. Teaching hospitals, but even during the residency, you have to be involved with research projects. And what we've done, whenever I've worked with sites, at least in the US, is have those residents be sub investigators on the clinical trials that are happening in the department. That is them building experience. So when they are done with residency and are independent MDs, they can then be looked at as someone who has had experience as a to be a PI now because they've had X number of years and as sub-I, as opposed to someone who has not had that exposure and then you're considering them to be PI. That's not going to happen. Most likely not. So,
Rafi, pertaining to your question, in University of Alberta, they have a full 5-year residency in research for pathologists.
Okay.
She's a doctor from India. She came in Sri Lanka. I'll probably link you up with her.
Okay.
It's a full research 5-year program, and then she's doing right now she's doing like COVID testing and stem cells and stuff like that. So I do not really know what she's exactly doing, but I heard from like she's like a common friend to us. So I'll link you up with her. She's at Edmonton right now. Yeah. So they've selected, I think, 2 or 3 people just to do full research. So they do not do any form of clinical work. Yeah. So
Got it.
yeah, I'll
So
link you up.
that was actually my question, Pine. So that's called MD PhD. Like they do MD and also PhD together.
Yes, correct.
Right. Yeah.
They do a PhD. So upon graduation, she probably, because I know that she's involved in a few trials, and especially when COVID started, that's when she started a residency. So she was doing a lot of microscopic work, but right now she's doing a lot of other like clinical trial works. So I remember clinical trials stuff. So I haven't really asked her a lot. So but probably it'll be good to find out from her.
Okay. Thank
I'll
you.
get a contact for you.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. But you guys will have some exposure at pharma and site level, and that's it. You start from there. You finish your practicum, and then you get hired by them or by their network.
mhm. Yeah, sites are a good place to start. It's easier to get in.
And another question, Deputy, are you like a Canadian national or U.S. national? I mean, I just want to ask this question. I'm asking you this question because I wanted to know, being a Canadian, if you have a Canadian passport and you get a job in U.S. So I heard that one of my friends, she was in Toronto and she applied at Harvard University, and she was having difficulty getting visa for research. So is that the case or not?
Yeah, immigration and the whole process can be a separate topic to discuss in a meeting.
Okay.
I am neither a US national nor a Canadian national. I'm an Indian.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so I was on a visa in the US, and yeah, So yes,
Okay.
I agree. It is difficult to get work visa in the U.S. and the process is just
Yeah,
long.
it's cumbersome. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And yeah, because she was coming back to Canada. She did research. She got the J1 visa, I think, but and she did the research for 3 years. But in the end, they had no place for her. So now she's coming back to Canada, and she is worried that she'll be able to get any job here or not. So that's what
Yeah,
something.
J1 is even more complicated. H1 is a little less complicated, but being a
Okay.
Canadian national going to the US changes and makes things a little bit easier, if that helps.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
But yeah, that's just another hurdle amongst other several hurdles to get a job
Right.
that I
Right.
very closely experienced. And I've seen the difference because here I don't need sponsorship, and in the US I needed it, and so I've seen the difference. And there's opportunities in the US that are not accessible to you thanks to the immigration system, and then
Yeah.
opportunities here that become available to you just because there's just no need. That question is out of the question. So
Right.
I definitely experienced that.
So, in Shelly, in your experience, you have worked in with U.S. sites and Canadian sites. Like, did you find it that it was difficult to, go and work in U.S.?
Not really, no.
Okay,
No, as Canadian, I don't think there's any problem.
Right. As a Canadian national, that's different.
Yeah.
okay. Then probably I'll have to wait for another few months.
Thankfully, it's faster here, huh?
Yeah.
Any other questions for me?
No, I don't have any questions. But yeah, if I have any questions, can we email you or connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, for sure. Find me on LinkedIn, and I'll put my email here in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
Thank
you.
you.
so much, Deepti, for your time.
No problem.
Thank you
I'm
so much.
Great
happy
conversation.
to meet you.
Very
Yeah,
educational
let me
informative.
know if anybody has additional questions later on that you think of.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
So no meeting tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, no meeting tomorrow, and